So we've been kind of looking at this whole theme of what it's like when God comes in his power, when he comes in his holiness, when he comes in his grace. And so we've been kind of thinking about it over the last few weeks. I'm going to continue, but kind of if you've ever watched or been to a Shakespeare play, sometimes Shakespeare does this trick. I'm sure you all know about this. It's a play within a play. Do you know that? Okay, yeah, right. Yeah. So he has a play within a play. Right, so Shakespeare does this bit. But we've got not a play within a play. We've got a series within a series. Okay, have you got that? So we've got a 4-part series coming up now, and it's still part of When God Comes, but we're looking at a king in the Old Testament part of the Bible who brought incredible change to his nation. And we're going to pick up what he did in 4 different parts as we look at that. So this morning, put your seatbelts on, because we're going to look at the whole issue of idolatry. And you think, oh, that's nothing to do with me. It might be by the end of this message. So let's see. But also, I've shared a couple of stories from different places. Last time I shared, we looked at what one American guy I was listening to called the revival in the Hebrides. All right, we know it as the Hebrides, all right. So, but he talked about what happened when God came powerfully. But here's one from 1970, and there's in Kentucky in America. There's a seminary, like a university called Asbury, and in February 1970 in Asbury, the dean of the college stood up to speak in the chapel. And he led people to give personal testimony. And as he did that, many people on campus had been praying for spiritual renewal and were trusting God to do something. And soon there was a line of people queuing up to give testimony. But then a spirit of powerful revival came down on the whole chapel. And the chapel was filled with rejoicing. Classes were cancelled for a whole week. Can you imagine that? Grace has been talking to the students. No classes. You're going to be in chapel for a whole week. And they had 144 hours of unbroken praise, worship, and meeting with God. And that must have been amazing. But what flowed out of that, listen to this, 2,000 teams went out from the college to go and witness and minister in different churches and in other college campuses over the next year or so. In other words, God moved in his grace and in his power among those young students, but the flow out of that was 2,000 teams flowing out to minister Jesus to people across America. Now, that's 1970. What I've asked Bishop Keith when he comes in a few weeks' time to induct Pastor Jamie as the senior pastor here. By the way, this is my last but one preach. Some of you will be relieved about that. But I've asked him, because he went to that college when he was a student. And what happened about a year or so ago was that they had another amazing outbreak of God's grace and God's presence right across the campus. And Bishop Keith and his wife went there just to be there and just to help. And so I've asked him to come and tell us a little bit about that before he preaches. So we're going to turn to this passage in the Old Testament, 2 Chronicles, chapter 34. This is one of the books where it talks about the records of some of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah, because by this time the kingdom of Israel had a political split. They'd kind of done a self-imposed Brexit, if you will, and they'd not left Europe, they'd left each other. So you had the northern kingdom, so they was the lads who, spoke like us up north, all right? And then you had the southern kingdom down in Judah, and they were a bit posher because they had the capital city of Jerusalem, okay? All right, so it's a bit like that anyway. And so Josiah is a king, and he becomes king at the age of 8. Can you imagine that? So we're going to read from 2 Chronicles chapter 34 and the first 13 verses. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 31 years. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and walked in the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or to the left. In the 8th year of his reign, so he's now 16, while he was still young, he began to seek the God of his father David. In his 12th year, so now he's 18, right? Well, I think he is anyway. In his 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of high places, Asherah poles, carved idols, and cast images. Under his direction, the altars of the Baals were torn down. He cut to pieces the incense altars that were above them and smashed the Asherah poles. So Baal was one of the gods they worshipped. Asherah poles were ways in which they used to worship other gods. So he smashed the Asherah poles and the images. He broke them into pieces and scattered them over the graves of those who'd sacrificed to them. That was a way of desecrating those places of worship, scattering them over dead people's graves. He burned the bones of the priests on their altars and purged Judah and Jerusalem. In the towns of Manasseh, Ephraim, and Simeon, as far as Naphtali, and in the ruins around them, he tore down the altars and the Asherah poles, crushed the idols to powder, cut to pieces the incense altars throughout Israel, and then he went back to Jerusalem. In the 18th year of Josiah's reign, how old is he now then? Okay, 26, you got it? Accountants working it out. In the 18th year of Josiah's reign, to purify the land and the temple, he sent Shaphan, son of Azaliah, and Maaseiah, the ruler of the city, with Joah, son of Jehoaz, the recorder, to repair the temple of the Lord his God. Then he went to Hilkiah the high priest and gave him the money that had been brought into the temple of God, which the Levites, who were the doorkeepers, had collected from the people of Manasseh, Ephraim, and the entire remnant of Israel, and from all the people of Judah and Benjamin, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Then they entrusted it to the men appointed to supervise the work on the Lord's temple. These men paid the workers who restored and repaired the temple. They also gave money to the carpenters and the builders to purchase dressed stone and timber for joists and beams for the buildings that the kings of Judah had allowed to fall into ruin. The men did their work faithfully. Over them to direct them were Jahath and Obadiah, Levites descended from Merari, and Zechariah and Meshullam descended from Kohath. The Levites, who were all skilled in playing musical instruments, had charge of the laborers and supervised all the workers from job to job. Some of the Levites were secretaries, scribes, and doorkeepers. I just love that thought that what was it? All the Levites who were skilled in playing musical instruments were in charge of the builders, the bricklayers, and the carpenters. Great thought. So that's the word of God. So what you might know, some of you, and some of you may not know, that Israel, or the people of God, had this kind of up and down relationship with him. When they were up, they were really up, and God was their sole fix. They worshipped him, they followed him with all their hearts, but their heads were easily turned astray to other nations who worshipped other gods and had idols. They weren't allowed idols, and they began to worship them. The great problem with that was idolatry often led them to places where they were not just involved in idolatry, it led them, because of the way people worship those other gods, into immorality. That's sexual immorality. And then often, because they lost the sight of who God was and a sight of his goodness and his justice, it led them to injustice. So usually when you read the Old Testament, You're reading the people of Israel either being kind of on a mountaintop worshipping God and everything's right with God and them, or right down in the depths where they've really messed up their lives. They're worshipping other gods and they're committing idolatry, immorality, and injustice. And that's what was going on when at 8 years old, Josiah became king. It's part of their history. Just after Joshua had led the people of Israel into what we call the land of Canaan back then, and they got the land, Joshua says, as he's kind of finishing and he's ready to go to be with his God, he says, as for me and my house, I will serve the Lord. And all the people say, well, we're going to do that as well. And Joshua says to them, put away your idols. Hang on a minute. They've just been rescued from Egypt. They've experienced Moses giving the 10 Commandments to them and calling them to worship God alone, to have no images. And here's Joshua as he's got them into the land of Canaan and he's saying, put away your idols. That's kind of 3,500 years ago. About 1,000 years later, some of the prophets like Hosea are saying to the people of Israel, get rid of your idols. And Hosea, speaking for God, says, one of the most powerful passages in the Old Testament, he says, God says, you're like a wife who's deserted her husband. You're like a wife who's gone off as a prostitute and sold herself to other gods. And the expression or the feeling is that Hosea is saying God's heartbroken because you've walked away from him. God feels like you had a marriage and you've turned your back on it to commit idolatry, which is ultimately immorality, and you've prostituted yourself to other gods. And that's a heartbreaking passage. And then here, 2,500 years ago, not that long after Hosea was speaking those words, you got this young king at the age of 8, who by the time he's 16 comes to a place where he begins to know and understand and follow God. Now imagine as a 16-year-old, and then for those 2 years as you are discovering God, by the time you're 18, you start to purge your nation of idols. Not just kind of, hey guys, we think this idolatry thing's not that good. No, he goes through the nation, smashing them down, burning them up, desecrating their altars, because he's saying, we're not going to have this in the land. We're going to turn these idols over. We're going to get rid of them. And we won't have anything like that. We're going to fix our eyes totally and firmly upon our God. Amazing what he did. And I don't know if you can imagine some of you who are 18-year-olds, some of you maybe getting on for 26, kind of going on that kind of spiritual rampage, if you will, through the land. But he did it because his heart was sold out for God, and his passion for the holiness of God was that the only way we can come back to God is if we get rid of all these idols in the land. And that led, as you read on in the passage, when you get, as I said, this amusing picture where you get the musicians who are actually in charge of the builders and the carpenters and the bricklayers or whatever, and they're making sure the job's done. There's a reason for that. Historically, the generation of the musicians came from the priestly tribe who were in charge of the temple. So they were saying, right guys, put your guitars down, stop thumping out your drums, and just make sure the job gets done. That's what they were doing, making sure the temple's restored. Now, that was symbolic, because they're saying, look, the priority here is we restore the temple because we're restoring worship to him. We're restoring ourselves to him and to him alone. But the first step in that restoration, and Pastor Jamie will speak into it, the second step next week, but the first step was we throw down the idols. We throw down the things that are getting in the way between us and God. There's a great preacher who I've listened to and read. He's with the Lord now, Pastor Tim Keller. He was a preacher in New York, had massive impact worldwide. He just had this amazing ability to open up God's word and teach it and point people to Jesus. But he wrote these things about idolatry. Because you might say, well, hang on, what's that got to do with me? We don't have idols nowadays, because actually we do. I mean, some of us, you go around. It's amazing when you go around the idol factory. You've been around them. You've been around idol factories, haven't you? Come on, you've all been around garden centres where you can buy any number of Buddhas. Okay, yeah. Somebody's got an idol factory where they're producing those. Won't be so bad, but Buddha he didn't even believe in God. But anyway, we all end up worshipping with idols either in our gardens or in our homes. But that's not quite what I want us to think about. But this is what Keller says. What's an idol? It's anything that's so central and essential to your life that if you lose it, your life would feel hardly worth living. In other words, something that you are fixed on, that is, you sense that's what you're really about. And then he says, in other words, an idol is a counterfeit God. And we've made the idol a God. It goes on to say, an idol is something else besides Jesus Christ in our lives. And in order to grow, part of our job as Christians is to identify what those idols are and pull them out or pull them down. You're looking at yourself and saying, why am I so angry? Why am I so worried? Why am I depressed? And then when you begin to analyze them, it's because some of your goals, some of your ambitions, some of the things you fix your life on have actually come bigger in your life than God. And when they become bigger in your life than God and you begin to frustrate yourself because you're not achieving them, or they're not giving you what you really want them for, then you begin to feel that things are going wrong for you. 500 years ago, one of the Protestant Christian reformers, a guy called John Calvin, put it very quickly and succinctly like this. He said, the human heart is an idol factory churning out new idols. Wow. So you look at the history of Israel and what we said about Israel, that one minute they were up and they were fixed on God, worshipping him alone, and then their heads got turned, and they were then worshipping other idols that led them well away from God. And what people like Tim Keller is saying, what people like John Calvin was saying, and what I know from my own heart, is that my head gets turned. And I can fix my heart, my mind, my eyes, my life on things that are not Jesus. There's something else. And you think, well, that's not where I'm at. Well, I'll tell you some of the things I've fixed my heart on, okay? And you'll laugh because you'll think, well, they're stupid. But I know. So quite a long time ago, I really wanted a new rucksack. It consumed me. It was some time ago, so it was the days before you could just go on Amazon or you could go on a review page and find out what was the absolute best rucksack. So I was going in all the climbing shops and the mountain shops and the walking shops looking at rucksacks. And my heart just got, I was just consumed. That's all I was thinking about. Rucksack. You think, well, what a stupid thing to worship. I wasn't like doing that to it, all right, okay. Yeah, not in the shop, anyway. Right, okay. And then Catherine was getting me a rucksack for Christmas, which was so good of her. She got a rucksack off a market stall in the market. It wasn't a Van Gogh. And I'd set my heart on a Van Gogh. So then I persuaded her to say, can we kind of swap this in? And I can go and get a really, 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 really good rucksack. Now you think, well, that's just a bit stupid. Well, that's because I am just a bit stupid. And I once set my heart on a power saw. Come on, guys. Power saw's great. It's a handheld power saw. It's a brilliant piece of kit, right? And it consumed me. By this time, you could go on Amazon, you could go on review websites, and you could look for things. And I just looked and looked and looked. And you got to know, when I've set my heart on something, I don't just go out and get it. I kind of part of the covetousness phase of me is just kind of almost the tantalizing looking for ages till I finally get this saw. And I got this saw. I stuck it in my workshop, and I never used it. But I had it. I got it. Actually, it's been a brilliant saw. I've used it lots. I'm on a second blade, which shows you that you get through okay. But the point I'm making is this, and you might not think, well, I'm not an idiot like he is. I don't worship rucksacks or power saws. We all have this ability, just like the people of Israel, to have our heads turned to something else that is not Jesus, it's not God, and it's not following him. And it doesn't matter whether we're worshipping a TV program that we must not miss, whether it's our ambitions, and we'll come over to sort of things we can worship, but we all need to acknowledge exactly what John Calvin said, that there's something inside us of who we are in our humanity. There's something in us that turns our head away from God and causes us to fix on something else that is not him. And ultimately, when it's not him, it will mean that it's not his ways either. And not fixed on him and not his ways means that we will end up in a way of sin. A way of living our lives in a wrong way that doesn't honor him. So, just a thought. How do we begin to approach this? Now, I can only say I've only ever seen snippets of this TV program, but Catherine talks to me about it. And some of you know that our house is up for sale, and we're moving to a little town called Longridge, where we've begun a kind of a midweek church, and that's what we're focusing on once we've stepped away from Lancaster. So we've been doing a lot of clearing out. I don't know about you, but when you cleared out, it's a good feeling, isn't it? I've had stuff in the drawers under my bed. That's my side of the bed, right? Okay, you don't go in the drawers on the other side of the bed. Just you could get lost forever. No, if I go under my side, there's lots of little things like all the cell phones I've ever owned or been given, old broken binoculars and stuff that I just kept, and they've been there for years, and and then finally one day, right, I'm going to get it sorted. It's either going to the charity shop or it's going to the tip. So you clear it out, and you think, phew, that felt so good, just clearing out. I had a drawer by my bedside that had just unbelievable amount of coins from different countries around the world that I'm never going to spend because they ain't going to go back there, and just loads of stupid little bits and they've been in there for years, but it's my bedside drawer, right? And you clear it out, and it feels so good to clear it out because you go in there and you can find stuff now. That's the other thing. When you're cluttered, you can't find. And if your life is cluttered so much, you can't find him. All right? So Catherine tells me about this program about Sort Your Life Out with Stacey Solomon. And we might have a picture of a warehouse where what Stacey Solomon and her team does is they go into somebody's home where their house is literally absolutely, you can't move for clutter. And then you can't move for clutter, and what they do is they kind of take it all out, every single room by room, and then they go into a warehouse and they lay every room out in the warehouse as it is, all on the floor, all neat, nice, tidy, and then they bring the family in once they've emptied their house completely, and usually the warehouse is absolutely full of all their clutter. Apparently, a statistic in America is that most Americans' homes have 240,000 items in them. Can you imagine that? 240,000 items in them. But anyway, and what the people then do, they have to make a choice. They have to make a choice whether they really want to clear the clutter out of their lives. What have they got in their lives that they then choose to say, I'm getting rid of that? That's just cluttering up my life. I don't want to let it go. I used to visit a lady who's struggled with depression, but when you went into her apartment, you couldn't move. Absolutely cluttered up. And I visited this person faithfully, and I became absolutely convinced that if she would just let me get rid of the clutter, then it would tidy her life up. And so I kind of talked her into it. It took me a long time to talk her into it, and then there was the big day where I turned up with boxes, and I was going to clear the clutter out, or make a start anyway. And she couldn't, and she wouldn't let me. And that day I realized that the clutter wasn't there. The clutter was here. The clutter was here. And there was no way was she going to let her personality go if she couldn't deal with the clutter that was in here. And just like Stacey Solomon on her program is basically asking people to make a choice, we need to get to a place where we're saying, will we make the choice to let God challenge us enough and for us to be willing enough to clear out the clutter of our lives? So he's the only God. He's the one we're worshipping. He's the one we're following. So for some of us, it might be our ambition. For some of us, it might be our house or the house we want. Could be our car, could be our holiday, could be always insisting on the best, always insisting on the latest. I heard somebody the other day said, every time Apple produce something new, I'm off down the orchard. I'm off down the apple shop. I'm off down the apple shop to get it. He just has to have it. If it's Apple and it's new, he has to have it, all right? But what we need to do is ask ourselves, what becomes the idols of our lives? And Tim Keller has made a big long list, and I'm going to rattle through this list, okay? But as we go through this list, it'll be up on screen, and just all I'm asking is, will you be open enough to ask yourself, is that me? And can I suggest that if 3 of them are you, just stop thinking about it, because you don't want all of them to be you, okay? That's too much for one morning, all right? But you know what I'm saying? Just be open enough. So some of the things Tim Keller talks about are things like this. Get my notes. All right, yeah, so there's, there's a lot of things like Idol. There's American Idol show where people are, kind of wanting to be an idol. And I saw this one, it was really good. It was the Idols, the farewell season. This was the South African version of it. And I thought, yeah, that's great. Because today could be the farewell season for whatever is an idol in my life. It might be the farewell season for whatever's an idol in your life. So what idols do you need to say farewell to? And maybe the answer to the question of this is, life only has meaning, I only have worth if. So power idolatry, I only have worth if I have power and influence. And that might be you being a husband or a mum, or a husband or a wife, or a dad in your home. I've been there. I'm the one with the power. The kids do what I say because I say it. And that's got me into a heap of trouble sometimes with my girls, because I've got the power and I rule, okay? So that's what I mean when I talk about I have to have power and influence. Power idolatry. Approval idolatry. I only have worth if I have respect and I'm loved by others. I kid you not, most of us will fall into this one. We love to be loved. We like to be liked. And if we make that the be-all and end-all of who we are, the great danger is that that's become an idol to us. Comfort idolatry. I only have worth if I have the pleasures and quality of life that I enjoy. And we live for comfort in this world. We have a wonderful idol factory on the TV. It's called The Break. Okay? The commercial break, where it will parade a bunch of idols in front of you that your life won't be living if you don't have them, that you will not be comfortable if you don't have this latest, greatest three-piece suite by DFS, and there's a sale on, so get it now with 0% interest for the next 3 years. So you didn't know I was a DFS salesman, did you? Comfort idolatry. Control idolatry. I only have worth if I have mastery over my life. And sadly, sometimes that also leads to mastery over the people around me in my life. Helping idolatry. I only have worth if people depend on me. So why do I want to be a doctor? Why do I want to be a nurse? Why do I want to be a carer? Why do I want to be in a place where I'm serving other people, but actually what I'm really doing is serving myself, because I only have worth if people depend on me. Or dependence idolatry. I only have worth if somebody protects me. We want a partner, we want a husband, we want a wife, we want somebody around us who protects us, because that just makes me worth somebody, worth something. Independence idolatry. I only have worth if I'm free of all responsibilities. Don't want people around me. I want to be free. Work idolatry. I only have worth if I am highly productive. What's that phrase we use sometimes? Workaholic. So if you're a workaholic, why are you a workaholic? What's the story inside you that you're telling yourself about what you achieve and what you produce in work? Achievement idolatry. I only have worth if I'm recognized for my work. I'm a nobody if I'm not achieving something. Materialism idolatry. I only have worth if I have wealth and nice possessions. Again, it's a classic for our Western world, where we just keep building stuff up and building stuff up because we're taught to keep having stuff. Religion idolatry. I only have worth if I'm sticking to my moral codes. And the way I've learnt to live is the right way to live, and that gives me a sense of value. And you might not think, well, that's not me, but I know that's been me. And I know that it's something I have to work against, because I was brought up in church all my life, and part of being brought up in church is, well, you do this way, and you do it this way, and you do it this way. And if you don't do it this way, then you're not accepted. And by the time I'm doing it this way and this way and this way, I'm thinking, I'm doing all right. So can you see what I'm doing? I'm doing it this way because it elevates me. And when it elevates me, it brings him down. So religion idolatry. Person idolatry. I only have worth if I have a certain person in my life. Group idolatry. I only have worth if I'm in with the in crowd. So easy to fall for that one, especially when we're at uni and there's a whole bunch of students who are all liked and loved, and they're all in this group, and if only I could just be a part of them, I'll be okay. In with the in crowd. Racial idolatry. I only have worth if I understand my race is the superior one, and it's seen as superior. I have to confess that I've been there. I used to run with a beautiful Kenyan guy called Joe Capolio. We were at theology college together, and I was never a great runner. Just so you know, I'm flat-footed and splar-footed. I run like a ruptured duck. People who see me run will tell you that's true, okay? right? But I ran to keep fit. And Joe Capolio, he ran beautifully. Well, he would. He was Kenyan. And all I know is that he had this tracksuit where he had those things that come across your feet, so it kind of keeps it really tight to your legs. So, but I noticed his heels came right up to his backside every time, because I used to run behind him. So beautiful, so neat, so poised, so dignified. And there's me, my feet are flying in all directions. And I'll never forget this. Running behind him, one day I thought, oh, that's Joe. He runs so beautifully. And he's so intelligent because he's one of the bright boys at theology college. And then I thought this, and he's black. And the day that hit me, I suddenly realized that there's this streak of white racism in me that somehow I've been brought up with. And I've prayed about that, and I've tried to get to the root of it. And I was born in a village that was just completely white, right? But whenever I went home from school, and my mum, we lived in a shop, and my mum wasn't in the shop. She'd gone off shopping trip or something like that. So I'd go bursting into the shop and say, where's my mum? Do you know what they used to say to me? They used to say, she's run away with a black man. And that began a streak of racism in me that God had to deal with in my life. And deal with me in such a way that I recognize that part of this stupid, ignorant, proud white Western culture that we're brought up in has still got a long way to go over this one. A long, long way to go. So racism, idolatry. Family idolatry. I have only worth if my family is happy with me. Suffering idolatry. This is a tough one. I only feel love when I'm hurting or I have a problem, because that makes it about me. Now, please, if you've got difficulties in your life, if you've got problems in your life, I am not saying you shouldn't have them. Some of our stuff is real. Some of our problems are painful. Please, I'm not saying that. But if our absolute focus on is, I'm only got worth when the doctor's paying me attention, maybe we've got to rethink spiritually where we're at. Ideas idolatry. I only have worth if my politics or my cause is making progress. It doesn't matter what political cause you're at, but if you believe that's it, then maybe. And then image idolatry. I only have worth if I look right. Just check how I'm looking. Just press the right button. Yeah. Old. I see it all the time, and you see it all the time. You see people looking on their phones and reversing the camera just to make sure that they're looking good this morning. Or maybe, I'm not looking good this morning, I've got to do a bit, hang on a minute. Oh, that's better. I've got nothing, just so you know, it's not switched on. Okay. I am better when I can't see nothing in the mirror. But you know what I'm saying? We are taught to make ourselves the center of our world. We're taught to make ourselves, and TikTok and Insta and pouting pictures on those don't actually serve. They don't serve us. Who you are is who you are in Him, not who you are on Facebook or Insta or TikTok or whatever. Please, let God deal with that if you've got caught in the trap. So those are some thoughts. There may be other issues in your life where you know that somehow those things have become, or they're getting bigger than God. And Josiah, this young king who was brave enough to purge his land of idolatry, is a challenge to us. Because basically, it's saying, are you prepared to purge your life? Am I prepared to purge my life? To let God speak into me and deal with me, even this morning? You know, there was somebody else who threw down Godship. The Apostle Paul wrote about him when he wrote to the Philippian church. And he wrote these words, I want to point you to Jesus Christ, who did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but he made himself nothing and took the form of a servant and a human being. Our Lord Jesus was willing to step aside from his godness. I'm still trying to understand what that fully meant. But he didn't consider being God something to be grasped at. And the problem with our gods is that ultimately, sometimes we grasp at them. Sometimes it's our hearts or it's our heads that grasp after them and take the place of Jesus in our lives. So the challenge this morning is, what idols? There's an old hymn, and I love this line of this old hymn. And it's simply this: the dearest idol I have known, whate'er that idol be, help me to tear it from the throne and worship only thee. Now, we've gone through a long list. You might know there's something else in your life. But as we come to the communion table this morning, we're going to do it in a way that gives you an opportunity, gives me an opportunity to say, God, what are you saying to me this morning? God, what have I got my life fixed on that's not you? God, this morning, I just want to take a step of saying, I'm throwing that down before you now. And you may need to throw it down again tomorrow and the day after. You may need to chuck your rucksack in the rubbish. I can't do that. And that's the point. We can do it here, right now, but tomorrow morning we maybe can't do that. And we've got to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. The dearest idol I have known, whate'er that idol be, help me to tear it from the throne and worship only thee.